Great. This is Jeff Mindlin from ASU. So I was going to spend a couple of minutes and talk about what my students presented to our investment committee at our December retreat, which is basically kind of an evolution of what they've learned in class and what they've been doing in class from an investment side. And then, at the end of the presentation, they started talking about the shareholder engagement competition that we've talked about on this call, as well as the new SEC proposal, which is kind of the opposite of part of the intention of the class to bring more transparency and things like that. But Nicole and I thought it'd be interesting just for everybody to see what we've been doing and again tying it into some of those topics, and then I think part of what I'm looking for then is help from Nicole and team on how we can best fight against this with the students in the new semester when we get back into class in about a month. So the class, for those who haven't heard me talk about it before, is a 3-credit class, but it's divided into 2 semesters. So we have students for 2 semesters, and then we, as part of the culmination of the class, we like to have students present to different members of the community. So the timing worked out well this go around for them to speak actually to our investment committee, which not only I think is a good educational experience for the students to interact with business professionals, but it also then gave them the opportunity to share some insights about sustainable investing with the group that ultimately makes a lot of the decisions on how the endowment is managed. So this is what they had put together. I'll go rather quickly through it, but I think what's unique about the what we call our SIM, or our Student Investment Management Fund, on the ESG side is that they're really looking at a broader impact. We have 4 other SIM funds at the university, but those are really they're going in there and trying to make money in the couple of months they're investing, and really have no concern about what happened last year or what's going to happen in the future. But that's very different than what the sustainability students are thinking about, with trying to use the fund and their efforts to have more of a catalyst to change and bring about new ways of investing in a mission-aligned manner. So they started off with their vision statement. They then talked a little bit about how there's been a lot of progress in the institutional space, with more money going towards sustainable investing. I think the idea was that they wanted to bring some credibility to the committee that in some ways by not investing in this way more actively, they're somewhat falling behind the 8 ball. So kind of the evolution of money coming in is from the USIF survey that they're very familiar with. The different types of shareholder proposals, again, going to the later topic of the SEC changes, but what types of things people have been engaging in on that front. But I think what was noteworthy too is they talked about the evolution on how sustainable investing has changed. If you go back to the early days, when it was more largely a exclusionary sin stock type of way on the social side, evolved more into some of the apartheid and more political divestment, and then got more into the environmental side, and now you really have more of this ESG integration space. But I think what students were trying to translate, or what they learned a lot in the class, is really the spectrum of what is included in sustainable investing. And this I think is true of our committee, but the students especially, is when the class started, basically everybody thought of sustainable investing either in a purely divestment lens, or in the impact investing side, and really didn't understand again the full spectrum of that, and so they're able to communicate some of the nuances of that to our committee. Again, I think we have a faculty here at ASU that's big on research around persuasion, but what others are doing is a big way to persuade people. So students talked about, even in the short couple of months of our class, a lot of the progress of big institutional managers that have taken more initiative with sustainability in their investment portfolios, both on the pension and sovereign wealth side as well as other universities. So those are things that they talked about. They then got into, I think, the idea of what is the business case for why looking at environmental, social, and governance issues can contribute to better financial performance and success. And so again, everybody gets the the benefits to society and the planet on it, but I think as fiduciaries, our committee is really interested in what is the reason why we're going to make more money by thinking of this way. So talk through some of the theoretical side of how sustainability can help reduce risk and increase revenue and enhance a brand for a company that all has a financial bearing. This is, I think, interesting just on BP and the cost of capital, where again, big environmental issues have an enormous impact on the cost of capital. And obviously, when the disaster struck, there was a big spike in credit spreads, which would be intuitive. But I think what the real information on the chart is that even in the subsequent period, there was a huge premium that they had to pay from a cost of capital perspective, even after the disaster. So again, going back to the financial benefits of considering these things, going through a lot of those things on the brand side. Then had a student present more of the academic evidence that talked about the positive return from sustainable investing. Some of the pushback that we've had from the committee in the past is how short of a window of time that we've had to evaluate performance from sustainable investing or ESG metrics. And so they really tried to look at the investment research that had a little bit more back history to it. Part of what we talked about is just reduction of risk. So this is just a table showing how lower downside there was in more sustainable oriented strategies. And then this was research that went back to the 90s on outperformance of portfolios with ESG integrated, which again, push back on some of, again, the feedback that we've gotten from our committee that they can't really evaluate whether it's going to add value or not, because most research is the last 10 years or so, which is too short, whereas this goes back 25 plus years. They then got into what we've actually been doing from an investment portfolio perspective in the class. Last year's cohort had invested in the ESGU as a placeholder, so they held a portfolio of stocks they put on, I think, at the beginning of December and held through May, and then when class ended last semester, they sold out of it and went into the ESGU, which is an iShares ETF that optimizes for MSCI ESG score. So they were basically, the new class was handed that holding until they came up with their own placeholder. So during the 2 or 3 months that class started with, that fund, the ESGU, slightly outperformed the Russell 3000, which is our benchmark for the class. And then as they got more familiar with sustainable investing, they developed a core satellite strategy for what they wanted to hold while they developed their actual stock selection strategy. So they held DSI, which is one of the original sustainable ETFs. It's the KLD Social 400 one, and then wanted to have something that had a little bit more impact. So they went with a low carbon strategy, and then when we get back from break, they're going to start to build their portfolio. But they talked a little bit about what methodology they're going to use. So they talked about the performance of the two and kind of why they picked the two funds that they did. DSI was, again, a best in class is the sustainable strategy that they use. So they filter out the worst players and then maximize the highest ESG scoring companies. Had a relatively low tracking error with our main benchmark, but again, it wasn't super exciting either. It had the same Microsoft and and Apple holdings that almost every other fund has. So they combined that with a clean energy ETF that was a little bit more targeted in what they wanted to do. We also had a less volatility, a lower downside capture, so they were worried about the stock market declining during the couple of period given the trade war and impeachment and things like that. What happened interestingly though is that during the period that they were invested in it, interest rates went up, and so the ICLN has a lot of utilities, and that was a headwind to utilities, so it pretty severely lagged its benchmark. So they went up less for the period than the benchmark did. So they lagged their benchmark by about 1% during that 2-month period where they had their new placeholders in the portfolio, and again, most of that was due to the utility overweight of the ICLN. Then they went through what they're going to do next semester, and this is also the basis for how they're going to pick the stock or one of the stocks that the stock they present for the active ownership competition. But they wanted to again do a core satellite approach where they had a core that didn't have too much tracking error to the benchmark. They were going to look at the largest companies in the Russell 3, which is our benchmark, market cap weight them with roughly the sector weights. They wanted to divest from tobacco, weapons, extraction, exploration coal, and opioid companies. So not broad all fossil fuels, but specific groups there. And then tobacco is something banned from campus that they saw no benefit of investing in, and same thing with weapons. They're going to combine, again, this goes somewhat to the competition, a quantitative framework to filter that universe down to companies that they could actually analyze. So using certain financial metrics that ASU research has shown have a positive impact on returns, and then Sustainalytics score as a starting point, and then that'll filter it down to the point where they could do more qualitative analysis of the company, looking at CSR reports. And then the SDGs, there's a industry matrix where for each industry there's certain factors and elements to identify best players or best practices within each specific industry at that granular of a level. So they're going to use that to then overlay with that list to figure out which ones they want to actually hold in this core. And then again, one of these would be the one that they start to look at then for the competition. And then again, similar to what they're currently doing with the ICLN, because that portfolio is going to be largely, the same usual suspects that we're used to. They wanted to then supplement that with bigger impact type of names that are in themes that they cared about. So looking at these different groups that you see here: food and agriculture, housing, clean energy, health, water, and education, and find probably smaller cap companies, but more interesting ideas that are having a bigger positive impact to invest in. And there'd be less financial consideration putting into these themes, but they did want to use some basic analyst consensus score to make sure that they weren't investing in any dogs, but really focus on what the companies are doing well as a way of picking out which stocks they wanted to invest in there. Then again, we that's kind of what they want to do from the investment side. So then at the end, they talked a little about the business roundtable, and again, this idea of serving different stakeholders beyond your shareholders. And then again, the kind of confounding thing going on with the new SEC proposal on proxy rules that makes it harder to have a voice. Which again is a big part of what we've been talking about, and one of the reasons why I think we've said our committee is not really in favor of divestment and reducing our investment universe. So one of the things we've talked about is that if you own the stocks, you have a voice to help with the type of change you want to see and make these companies better. So again, the SEC proposal is somewhat at odds with that. Talked about our competition that they're going to be participating in the new year, and then they ended with an interesting case study. Pinnacle West is a big utility here in Arizona that owns Arizona Public Service, and so they talked a little bit about some of the nuance that they learned that why coal, divesting from coal is maybe not as easy as it seems. Pinnacle West's exit strategy for coal doesn't have them out of coal powered utilities until 2038, which doesn't seem very aggressive given that it's 2020 basically. But as I got into the details on why that is and some of the societal impact of removing a power station that's in an Indian reservation in the Four Corners in the Navajo Nation, and how many high-paying jobs it provides there, and the impact of closing that plant before they would otherwise do so on that community. Trying to think about that as they weigh the environmental impact of coal, I think was again an interesting element of how these things are not so black and white. And then similarly, we had the Chief Sustainability Officer from APS come out and talk to us and talked about solar as well. And as solar is not necessarily the only answer, in the sense that there's this thing that they call the duckbill curve, and it's basically the punchline is that during the day, obviously when the sun is shining, we don't get wind here, but when the sun is shining, the renewables are providing ample electricity to satisfy the needs that they have during the day. And then when everybody goes home from work and the sun goes down, the use of renewables is less impactful because there's battery storage is not efficient enough. So they still need electricity from traditional sources to meet that need. So again, creating more solar is not going to solve the need, which is that peak evening demand. So again, it's kind of interesting for them to see this idea of coal having a positive side and solar not the only answer. So that was what they presented to our committee a couple of weeks ago, and again, I think it was a good opportunity for them to get in front of the decision makers and not come off as just wanting to save the polar bears, but have some actual science and nuance behind how sustainable investing could be positive and where they wanted to go with the strategy.
Great, thank you, Jeff. And I'm wondering if you can just talk a little bit more about that dynamic between the student fund and the endowment. You mentioned a few times some presentations to various committees, just what that looks like and how often those meetings occur and what the hoped outcomes are of that relationship.
Sure. So taking a step back, so the money that our students manage in all of our student managed fund programs is coming from the endowment. So it's almost treated basically like the students are a manager. So if we've got a list of managers, and one of them is, or each of the funds is kind of its own manager. So even though it's a significant dollar amount, each fund manages about $800,000. It still is a fairly immaterial percentage of the endowment. So every performance report, everything that we provide to our committee has the performance of the students in there, just like it would any other manager. So the committee has a fiduciary oversight of the money that the students are managing. So we try to have them present regularly. So typically we don't have a good opportunity time-wise for them to present at an actual committee meeting. So we'll invite members of our committee to kind of a roundtable where the students will present, but oftentimes it's only one or two of the committee that's able to come for a special meeting like that. But this time, so that happened. That last year we did that twice. This year, again, because of the way the timing worked out, we were able to have them present at a committee meeting. So we kind of had a captive audience where we did a working lunch where the committee was eating while the students presented, and at that meeting too, then we had not only our investment committee, but also members of the BlackRock team, who's our outsourced chief investment officer, as well as members of the foundation board and other leadership from the foundation and the university that were present as well. So like I said, it's kind of a captive audience for them to hear about these concepts, and so I think part of what we're hoping the students are able to do with their strategy is start to start to influence other decisions and other policies where we can be more proactive in how we think about having more intentionality with the way we invest. And so it's nice sometimes for them to hear it not just from me, but from the students. And again, when they're hearing it from students in a rational, logical way, I think that carries a lot more weight than when the students are outside picketing and things like that. So it was I think it's been a good dynamic. And again, all the group, and sometimes everybody likes to paint these boards with a negative brush. It's all people who are super committed to the community and the university and want to see students succeed. So at their heart, they really like engaging with students, and so it's a great opportunity for students to come off as thoughtful and well informed in a topic like this that could be a little bit more controversial.
Thank you. Any other questions for Jeff?
Hi, Jeff. It's Arina. I thank you for that. I was really interested to see the Pinnacle West study, because I think that is a big question and a big issue in terms of a transition or divestment, is this job loss issue and what are the implications. So was there any further insight into what a transition might look like, or some solutions for that particular issue?
So after, so they've dealt with it a couple of times, because obviously here in Arizona we've got a lot of reservation land. So they just actually closed a different coal power plant that was older, that was in Arizona, that again had a big impact on jobs. The one that they're talking about that's going to be around for a while is and this isn't my area, but it's like an open pit power plant. So the coal that they're pulling from the ground is literally across the street from where the power plant is located. So to your question about jobs, not only do you have all the jobs of the community that's digging the coal, but then you've got all the jobs at the power plant as well. And I think unemployment in that community and in the Navajo Nation is over 50%. So they've been thinking, and these are, especially on the power plant side, these are high-paying jobs in general, and especially for that area. So it's I think it was 800 jobs or something like that is altogether what that is providing. So it's a big issue. And so after the sustainability officer left, we talked about it a little bit more and some of the efforts there. And it's hard because you have all these competing priorities, and do you keep people, the residents of the Navajo Nation are able to dig coal for themselves for free, basically. So they're having the issue of, again, cost versus, environmental impact. So they're able to get free power, basically, or free heat from coal that's in their backyard, so to speak. But obviously that has a bigger externality on the environment as a whole. So there's not a good answer on what to do with it. There's some efforts that they've made on trying to repurpose some of the train tracks and things like that. But there's not a great answer that has the impact of the positive impact on jobs that the coal and everybody else. Because nobody else wants the coal, so they can't even essentially they're, other than the couple residents. So they're basically shut down the power plant and the coal mine concurrently when that happens in the next 15 years or so.
Yeah, I think it just continues to be a major issue in any transition, and obviously in this transition, a major issue. So it's really important that it sounds like the students were able to be more thoughtful about all the implications of what this means.
Yep. Yeah, no, and I think that was hopefully what they get out of it a little bit. Again, I think our committee oftentimes thinks of students that care about this topic in a very black and white way, and that it's they're kind of altruistic and don't necessarily understand the other side. So it was a really deliberate intention to be able to show that some of the nuance of what's happening here, because I think, and I think the committee doesn't necessarily see the nuance either, but that's a big part of what we tried to impart on our students.
Mm-hmm.
So, hi, Jeff. This is Asla Şoğlu from Bryant University, and thank you for your presentation. So we also do ESG integration. We don't do any negative screening, just to give you a very quick summary. And our benchmark is S&P 500 index. ESG integration, we are also kind of trying, I would say, best-in-class approach. So if a student, a team proposes a stock to hold or to buy with the triple C, at the bottom 10 or decile, so it's much harder for us to buy it. So it requires around now 70% of the class to agree, and usually it's 50% our majority of voting is. How do you define the best in class, or what's your kind of thinking on that? Because it really depends on whether you are using MSCI ranking, whether you are using Sustainalytics resources. What do you think about, which metric or which data source you are going to use to define best in class?
Yep. And I don't have a great answer for you on it or on why we did it. So last year, the students used MSCI ESG score as their kind of go-to score for filtering and things like that. They picked that because that's the one that our committee looks at our scorecard of the endowment portfolio on. So it's the one that they felt they're most comfortable with. The challenge, though, was that Bloomberg doesn't at the time. I think they've added it, but at the time, Bloomberg didn't carry the MSCI ESG score, so it was harder for the students to access what it was for each company, and we had to kind of go through roundabout ways to try to get those scores for them to use. So this year they are using the Sustainalytics score. Again, it's kind of a quantitative filtering stage. We have a pretty small class. We only have about 10 students. So trying to get it down to a manageable universe that they can actually analyze was an important first step. If we gave each student 50 stocks that they had to go and read the CSR reports and do financial analysis on, it just wouldn't happen. So we were trying to get it down to a smaller universe. So we had to do something. So we're kind of defining it as the Sustainalytics score, where they have access to Bloomberg, and there's a little bit more transparency because it is on Bloomberg. And then again, I think they haven't finalized how they're going to combine the financial metrics with the sustainability score for that quote unquote best in class. But I think similar to what you said, there would be some threshold that if it didn't have at least a minimal score, that they wouldn't consider it in the portfolio regardless of its positive financial scores.
And we have a challenge now. I mean, it's a challenging task. One issue is now greenwashing. So I'm reading all these articles about greenwashing now. So companies, they want to increase their ESG score, but they're not really doing that well on the ESG. So their score can be high because of greenwashing, but then they are not really a good ESG company. So is there a way so we are thinking about, is there a way to identify those companies, like to look at their short interest data and things like that too. So just looking at the score, overall my experience was just the one side of the coin. And then, we might need to do more research, but again, time is limited, number of students is limited. So it's a challenging task. Yeah.
No, exactly, and that's part of why and we kind of this is the second year I've done a class, and we kind of ran out of time a little bit as it was. We didn't last year. We spent a little bit more time going through the differences in scores between Sustainalytics and MSCI and all those different ones out there and things like that. We didn't even really get to that yet this year. But you're right. There's one of my students last year who was an MBA student. From somewhere in South America, but he had done an internship at a company that had a poor ESG score, didn't change anything, but they basically hired a consultant to better answer the questionnaire and increase their score by 30%. So that became a really good example of what we'd want to avoid. And so you're totally right. I think part of the idea will be to have them get to a manageable number of stocks to analyze, and then especially on the sustainability side is really try to see if the company is greenwashing or practicing what they preach by looking at how integrated it is. One of my co-faculty that teaches it with me talks a lot about how a lot of times the CSR reports are written by a different group than the group that's doing the regular 10Ks and 10Qs, and so in some ways, if you see that if the language and font and if it just looks different, you can tell it's not very integrated. You really want to see the company's annual report and their sustainability reports, almost as one document, and to show that it's more integrated and not just greenwashing. But yeah, but exactly, we need to get it down to the point where they can start to look at all those types of filings and disclosures and judge that and see what jumps out at them or doesn't beyond just the score that some provider provides.
We just looked at for our portfolio scores from MSCI and Sustainalytics. We just grabbed it just to see the correlation is really low.
Yeah.
So it's just and it's a similar structure. We have also just a semester, and students learn a lot, including ESG, and usually we don't have time to to look at things in depth that much. So we just raise these points, we bring up those to discuss, but that's usually then the semester ends. So yeah.
Exactly. No, we totally ran out of time this go around, and then next semester it's just a 1 semester class, so I've only got the students for an hour a week. So we had 2 hours a week this time, but it's only an hour. So even though we have another semester ahead of us, we don't have a whole lot of in classroom time. So yeah, we're gonna have to move fast.
Yeah. But thank you so much for your presentation. It was very helpful.
All right, any other questions for Jeff?
I just this is Alice, just have a comment for Jeff and Osley. Just want to congratulate you on the work you're doing. It's so exciting to hear about the students at least learning about these challenges in the data. I think something a lot of folks in this space would like to have is more regulation around, or more standardized data, either through SASB or if there's a better organization. But SASB's done a lot of work, so that isn't the 10Ks and not that CSR. I mean, I think CSRs can be good, but as you said, if they're not integrated into the rest of the company reporting, it's a signal for more questions to come. So it's great that they're looking at this and figuring out what the state of the data is. Hopefully they'll be influencing that as they become active members in society, or more active members. So it's great.
And that was another, on the one of the, and it wasn't in the presentation, but the other thing we talked about was when they're qualitatively looking at things beyond the score, are there things that they specifically want to see in a company, right? So again, it's different by sector, but the governance ones and the social ones are easy, right? So looking at board diversity and things like that to make sure that that's happening. We talked a lot with BlackRock about some of the things that they're looking at. So part of how they're evaluating social practices is in a quantitative way is just looking at Glassdoor. So again, a company is going to say one thing about their policies, and everybody's going to sound really good by what the company says. But if you actually look at Glassdoor, especially for bigger companies, you get maybe a truer sense of the employment practices and satisfaction and things like that. So those are things that they're thinking about of trying to do to complement and supplement what the scores are doing, because there are so many challenges with them.